Imagine a vertical mile of unforgiving ice and emptiness, and a single fleeting second that separates ultimate glory from a tragic end. On September 26, 2022, the treacherous slopes of Manaslu, revered by locals as the Mountain of the Spirit, didn't just claim the life of an inexperienced climber, it swallowed a living legend whole. We are talking about Hilaree Nelson, the fearless captain of the North Face Global Athlete Team. This was a woman who had walked the razor's edge in the Everest death zone and survived where others perished. She was a pioneer, holding the title as the first human being in history to successfully ski down the face of Lhotse, the fourth highest mountain on Earth. So the haunting question remains, why at the absolute zenith of her illustrious career and under a crystal clear sky with perfect conditions did a small, seemingly insignificant slab of snow become her executioner? And can you even imagine the visceral horror of watching your life partner vanish into a dark chasm, standing there utterly paralyzed, unable to do a single thing to save them? To understand her end, we must look at her beginning. Picture freezing rain, impenetrable fogs, and snow so heavy it feels like wet cement. This is the brutal, bone-chilling reality of the Cascade Mountains in the Pacific Northwest, a place that doesn't forgive weakness. While other children were learning to snowplow on sunny, perfectly groomed resort slopes, a 3-year-old Hilaree Nelson was clicking into her very first pair of skis under the leaden gray skies of Seattle at Stevens Pass. Her parents Stan and Robin had no intention of shielding their daughter from the harsh elements. They threw her right into them. Out here in Washington State, you don't negotiate with the weather. The conditions dictate the rules of engagement. The snow isn't light and fluffy, it is thick, heavy, and sticky. It grabs at your skis like a vice, throws you off balance with every turn, and soaks your clothes through to the skin in an instant. Yet this aggressive, miserable environment transformed into her greatest training ground. Every agonizing battle with that heavy snow forged her unique muscular skiing technique and gave her a phenomenal, almost supernatural sense of balance. She internalized a crucial life lesson before she could even read. There is absolutely no point in sitting around waiting for perfect weather because it might never come. You have to work with whatever chaotic hand nature deals you right here and right now. But her iron will wasn't just forged on the ski slopes. She was a competitor in every sense of the word. At Shorewood High School, she trades her ski boots for high tops and dominates the court as the captain of the varsity basketball team. The pressure on her shoulders is immense. Hilaree leads her squad through a grueling season, pushing them toward a historic achievement that would go down in the school's books: 23 victories and only 2 defeats, a state record that stood tall. Team sports taught her the visceral lessons you simply cannot learn from a biology textbook. She learned the non-negotiable value of discipline and the intricate mechanics of working as a unit. It is here on the hardwood that she truly understands that success relies on the strength of every single link in the chain, and that true leadership isn't about glory, it is above all about taking ultimate responsibility for those standing beside you. These leadership skills would become the bedrock upon which her most death-defying expeditions would later be built. After tossing her graduation cap, she enrolls at Colorado College, dives headfirst into her studies, and emerges with a respectable degree in biology. To an outsider, it seemed like her life was perfectly mapped out: a career in science, a steady paycheck, and a predictable, safe future. But holding that diploma felt less like a ticket to the American dream and more like a sentence to a lifetime of boredom in a 9-to-5 cage. It feels like the starting gun for a completely different race. The moment she graduates, she can physically feel the walls of the laboratory closing in on her spirit. Hilaree makes a bold decision that shatters everyone's expectations of her. She is ready for a radical change of scenery, prepared to take a massive leap into the terrifying unknown. The year is 1995, and she is about to leave her safety net far behind. She has a one-way ticket to France, burning a hole in her pocket and a mind cluttered with nothing but a thirst for absolute freedom and deep snow. Hilaree lands in Chamonix, the undisputed mecca of global mountaineering, with a simple, naive plan: spend one glorious season skiing her heart out and then return to the real world. But the mountains have a way of laughing at human plans, especially for those who dare to truly answer their call. That single season stretches and morphs into 5 long transformative years, completely rewriting the script of her destiny. Chamonix is not your typical resort, with heated lifts and cozy après-ski cafes. It is a brutal proving ground, a daily test of your grit and mettle. She is thrown into a completely alien environment, surrounded by the world's elite alpinists, people for whom risking death is just another part of the Tuesday morning grind. The atmosphere is simultaneously crushing and intoxicating. Hilaree quickly realizes that the skills she brought from home won't cut it here. She is swimming in the deep end now. The safe-marked slopes of America are a distant memory. Her new world is a chaotic landscape of wild, shifting glaciers, gaping crevasses that could swallow a bus, and steep couloirs where a single mistake costs you everything. Skis are no longer just toys for getting down the hill. They have become essential tools for survival. She learns to manage ropes, drive ice screws into bulletproof walls, and read the treacherous terrain like a professional guide. This isn't just skiing anymore. It is the art of high-stakes ski mountaineering. The learning curve is steep, vertical, and unforgiving, but brutally effective. The instincts she developed fighting the heavy, wet snow of the Cascades are now honed to a lethal precision on the knife-edge ridges of the French Alps. Just a year after her arrival in 1996, she enters the European Extreme Skiing Championship. Nobody is placing bets on the unknown American girl, but she drops in and showcases an aggressive, fluid, and technical style that leaves the competition in the dust. Her victory makes a loud, undeniable statement to the world. She proves she doesn't just possess the grit to survive on complex terrain, she has the talent to absolutely dominate it. This unexpected success immediately grabs the industry's attention. Major sponsors start eyeing this daring athlete who seems as comfortable balancing on vertical ice as most people are walking on a city sidewalk. Then in 1999, a pivotal moment changes everything. Hilaree signs her first professional contract with the industry giant, the North Face. From this point forward, there is no turning back to a normal life. The recent college graduate and casual ski enthusiast is gone forever. In her place stands a world-class professional athlete poised and ready to tackle the most ambitious and dangerous projects on the planet. The contract with a global brand is inked and dry. But instead of resting on her laurels in the comfortable, accessible resorts of Europe, she unfolds a map of the world and starts hunting for the blank spaces, the places where no one else goes. The familiar peaks of the Alps suddenly feel too small, too contained. Hilaree craves raw, unfiltered exploration, the kind you find in zones without rescue helicopters, cell service, or cozy huts serving hot chocolate. In 2002, she packs her expedition gear and heads for Mongolia, specifically the wild, remote Altai mountain range. This is no longer just a sport. It is a true expedition into the great unknown. Here, time seems to grind to a halt. There is nothing but vast, wind-swept steppes and rugged peaks revered as sacred deities by the local nomads. The goal is incredibly ambitious: to ski all 5 of the sacred peaks of Tavanbogd. No human had ever dared to carve a line down these holy slopes before. She stands on the summit, the gale-force wind nearly knocking her over, and gazes down at the descent. Local herders watch in utter disbelief. To them, the long planks attached to her feet look like tools from another universe. Hilaree drops in, becoming a true pioneer in real time. The snow is unpredictable, the terrain is completely unfamiliar, but she threads her way down, leaving the very first ski tracks in the ancient history of these mountains. But the wide-open spaces of Mongolia only whet her appetite for something greater. In 2005, she decides it is time to test her vertical limits against the giants. Her eyes turn toward the Himalayas. The target, Cho-Oyu, the 6th highest peak on the planet. This is more than just mountains now. This is the 8,000-meter zone, a hostile territory where the human body begins to die the moment you arrive, operating on the absolute brink of systemic failure. Her team includes the legendary telemark skier Kasia Rigby and veteran mountaineer Willie Benegas. The stakes couldn't possibly be higher. Hilaree makes a critical, dangerous decision: she will climb without supplemental oxygen. At that altitude, every single breath is a desperate struggle. Your lungs feel like they are on fire, and your brain is slowly starved by hypoxia. The climbers around her look like astronauts in their bulky oxygen masks, but she chooses to climb in pure, unassisted style. Step by agonizing, step dragging the leaden dead weight of her legs, she finally reaches the summit. The entire world is spread out at her feet, but she knows the hardest and most dangerous part is yet to come. Most climbers barely have the energy to stumble back down, but Hilaree clicks into her bindings. Skiing an 8,000er demands a level of superhuman focus that is hard to comprehend. One wrong move, amplified by her exhaustion, would be instantly fatal. She glides down, cutting through the dangerously thin air. Her steel edges bite into the hard-packed, bulletproof snow, each turn requiring a colossal physical effort. Her successful descent from Cho-Oyu is her golden ticket to the major leagues of mountaineering. It is now crystal clear to everyone she isn't just a skier who got lucky and went high. She is an elite high-altitude athlete capable of operating with precision at the absolute limit of human potential. Imagine a frozen, icy wasteland where massive granite walls rise for thousands of feet, shooting straight out of a frozen ocean. This is Baffin Island, and here in 2007, Hilaree Nelson faces a challenge on a completely new level. This time, she isn't just a participant tagging along on a guided trip. She is the engine, the heart, and the brains of the entire operation. Hilaree is leading an all-female expedition into one of the most severe, inhospitable corners of the Arctic. Her partner is Ingrid Backstrom, an incredible skier famous for her movie segments, but the crushing weight of the team's survival in this completely autonomous setting rests squarely on Nelson's shoulders. There is no one around for hundreds of miles. It is just them, the roaming polar bears, and a biting wind that slices through even the most expensive technical gear. Their mission sounds bordering on crazy. She hunts for lines tucked away in the deep shadow skiing chutes so tight they feel like the earth is closing in on you. In these frozen cracks between the granite walls, the sun is a rare guest, showing its face for barely an hour or two before vanishing, leaving the air to settle into a bone-deep freeze where temperatures refuse to climb above 20 degrees below zero. Hilaree isn't just a participant here. She is the architect of the entire mission. The burden of every logistical nightmare and strategic pivot rests squarely on her shoulders. She dissects the snowpack for hidden dangers and maps the path forward, holding the ultimate veto power. She decides when they press on into the unknown and when they retreat to fight another day. In previous years, she could tuck herself into the slipstream of veterans like Willie Benegas, letting them break the trail and carry the mental load. But out here, that safety net has been slashed. There are no mentors to look back at. If things go sideways, the only salvation lies within her own skill set and the trust she places in her partner. The day begins long before boots hit the snow, starting with an obsessive review of topographic maps and shifting weather patterns. Navigating the glacier requires a chess player's foresight, with every move calculated to avoid disaster. And the payoff is legendary. The team carves their signatures into virgin snow, claiming first descents down couloirs that have never felt the edge of a ski. We are talking about angles so severe that the snowpack is practically defying gravity just to stay attached to the face. A single misstep here doesn't mean a tumble. It means a lethal pinball game against jagged bedrock. Yet amidst this vertigo-inducing exposure, Hilaree operates with a terrifyingly calm resolve. She possesses an almost supernatural intuition for the mountains, decoding the language of the terrain as easily as reading the morning paper. Pulling off this expedition doesn't just add a notch to her belt, it fundamentally alters how the professional alpine world perceives her capabilities. If her previous climbs were the coursework, Baffin Island is her final dissertation in high-stakes leadership. It serves as undeniable proof both to the skeptics and to her own inner critic that she has the vision and grit to conceptualize and execute the most intricate expeditions from scratch. Gone are the days of being the token skier invited merely to make the photos look good. She has evolved into a multi-dimensional powerhouse capable of enduring the crushing Arctic freeze, hauling sleds that weigh a ton across the sea ice and making split-second choices when life and death hang in the balance. Nelson cements her status as a rock-solid leader who doesn't crack when the pressure mounts. This newfound authority acts as a key unlocking access to objectives that are even more audacious and demanding. Picture yourself trying to run a full marathon while hyperventilating through a narrow cocktail straw, all while a bag of cement crushes your spine. That is the suffocating reality of every inch of progress in the death zone, a place where the air is too thin to keep a human being alive for long. But for Hilaree Nelson, in 2012, merely surviving that agony wasn't a big enough test. Trading the frozen silence of Baffin Island for the chaotic energy of the Himalayas, she accepts an invitation from the icon himself, Conrad Anker. She signs on for a massive, sprawling undertaking in collaboration with the University of Montana. Officially, the mission statement is purely academic, a deep dive into high-altitude geology and the limits of human physiology. It sounds sterile, scientific, and safe. However, hidden beneath the layers of data and research protocols is an ambition that teeters on the edge of madness. The goal is the double, linking the two tallest peaks on Earth in one continuous, breathless push. Fast forward to May 25th, 2012, and Hilaree is standing on the roof of the world. She is perched at 8,848 meters atop Mount Everest. The curvature of the planet spreads out beneath her boots, while the sky above fades into the infinite star-studded void of space. For 99% of climbers, this summit represents the finish line, a moment to breathe a sigh of relief before dreaming of a hot meal in a safe tent. For Nelson, this victory is merely the halfway point. She checks her wrist. The clock is ticking and every passing second is an enemy. She denies herself the luxury of rest. Descending rapidly to the South Col, she bypasses the safety of the camp entirely. Instead of unzipping a sleeping bag, she pivots and sets her sights on the neighboring Titan Lhotse. Her body, already battered by the ascent of Everest, is screaming, in protest, begging for a reprieve. Hilaree ignores the biological alarms and forces her legs to churn. It has transcended sport. It is now a biological war against her own limitations. The traverse to Lhotse requires a trance-like state of concentration. She must claw her way back up into the thin air, navigating a vertical chute of bulletproof ice on the fourth highest mountain on Earth, rising to 8,516 meters. Her lungs feel like they are incinerating with every breath. Lifting a boot feels as difficult as deadlifting heavy iron. She is operating in a hypoxic fog, balancing precariously on that razor-thin line between wakefulness and passing out. The sun hasn't even set on her ordeal. Within that single merciless 24-hour window, she drags herself onto the second summit. Hilaree Nelson has just executed what many claimed was physically impossible. She etches her name in history as the first woman to survive this deadly doubleheader in one day. It's an achievement that shreds the textbooks on human endurance, proving that our biology can withstand the death zone far longer than physiologists ever believed. Standing there, she is the undisputed queen of the high-altitude world at the absolute zenith of her fame and physical prowess, radiating an untouchable confidence. She has no way of knowing the bill is about to come due. The mountain is about to collect a heavy tax for her triumph. In a heartbeat, the adrenaline-fueled euphoria of the world record evaporates, replaced by the cold, hard gravity of the descent. At 8,000 meters, after a full day and night of redlining her engine, her coordination is shot. Every step is a gamble. Hilaree begins the down climb, but at this altitude, the mountain does not offer grace periods for a lapse in focus. It happens in a split second, a slightly clumsy placement on the concrete hard snow. Her foot twists violently beneath her, snapping into an angle that nature never intended. A bolt of white-hot agony rips through her ankle, screaming that something has gone terribly, terribly wrong. This isn't a walk-it-off sprain. The structural integrity of her ankle has failed. The ligaments have shredded. Anywhere else on the planet, a rescue team would be inbound with a litter. But up here in the stratosphere, there is no 911. She is utterly alone. The math is simple and terrifying. If she stops to nurse the injury, the hypothermia and exhaustion will kill her long before the ankle does. Thus begins the most harrowing descent of her career. She must perform a miracle, forcing her entire body weight onto a shattered joint step after agonizing step down the terrifyingly steep and icy face of Lhotse. Every time her boot touches the ice, her nervous system overloads with blinding pain. She has to mentally sever the connection to her foot, turning herself into a biological robot. With a single line of code, keep moving down or die. She refuses to be carried, descending under her own power to avoid endangering her teammates, showcasing a grit that borders on the superhuman. But once the survival adrenaline wears off and she reaches safety, the catastrophic price of that double summit becomes impossible to ignore. The MRI confirms the worst complete ligament ruptures. The medical prognosis is a prison sentence for an athlete, months of being casted up, followed by a grueling, uncertain rehabilitation process. Her expansive world of endless skylines and vertical conquest instantly collapses. Her universe is now confined to the four walls of her bedroom and the sterile fluorescent lights of a physical therapy clinic. For a woman whose identity is forged in perpetual motion, this enforced stagnation is a form of psychological torture, far worse than altitude sickness. Time slows to a crawl, and while her body knits itself back together, her mind becomes a breeding ground for dark, creeping doubts. The downtime strips away the glamour of her success, forcing her to stare into the mirror without the protective filter of triumph. She is haunted by the difficult questions: is the glory worth the destruction of her body? Can she ever claw her way back to the elite tier she once occupied? Or did she leave the best version of herself frozen on the summit of Lhotse? The injury destabilizes her entire foundation, forcing a painful audit of what actually matters. Her armor of invincibility is shattered. In the quiet hours, a cold fear takes root, the terrified realization that her life as a professional mountaineer might have just ended in a plaster cast. Fast forward to 2014. Erase the mental image of pristine white peaks and the crisp, thin air of the Himalayas. Hilaree plunges into the suffocating green inferno of Myanmar, spearheading a high-profile expedition for National Geographic. The target is a geographical ghost, the elusive summit of Hakakabo Razi. It is a mountain shrouded in mystery with no consensus on whether it truly stands as the highest point in Southeast Asia. Her team's mandate is to lug precision GPS gear to the top and end the argument once and for all. But this mountain does not give up its secrets easily. It is fortified by a ring of nearly impenetrable jungle. This is a type of suffering that no CrossFit gym or treadmill can prepare you to endure. The approach alone is a nightmare, a 100-mile death march through primal forest. Trails here are theoretical at best, existing mostly in the minds of optimistic mapmakers. Every yard gained is a hand-to-hand combat against tangles of vines and knee-deep sludge. The jungle drains their vitality before they even see the base of the climb. Their logistics begin to crumble. Food supplies evaporate faster than anticipated, pushing the group into a starvation scenario. Reduced to surviving on a meager handful of rice a day, their bodies switch into catabolic mode, devouring their own muscle tissue just to keep the lights on. As they finally punch out of the jungle and gain elevation, the tropical heat is replaced by a bone-rattling chill. Their sweat-soaked gear freezes solid, turning into icy armor that threatens to induce hypothermia. The relentless physical punishment begins to erode their mental defenses. The atmosphere turns toxic. A team that was meant to operate as a well-oiled machine begins to fracture, with exhaustion turning allies into liabilities. The air wasn't just thin, it was thick with toxic tension. Petty conflicts flared into major disputes and arguments over dwindling rations, and the correct route began to tear the group's cohesion apart. Hilaree stood by, watching helplessly as the expedition crumbled into chaos right in front of her. They are perched high on a razor-sharp ridge, exposed and vulnerable. The summit beckons like a siren, appearing so close that it feels as if they could simply reach out and grab it. The urge to gamble everything for that final glory is overwhelming. Sponsors are demanding results, and the world is hungry for a hero. But Hilaree takes a hard look at her teammates. She sees the hollows of their cheeks, their sunken eyes, and the uncontrollable tremors in their hands. The grim reality settles in, pushing upward, for the peak wouldn't be bravery. It would likely be a death sentence for the entire squad. In that critical second, the ego of the elite athlete recedes, and the wisdom of the expedition captain takes the wheel. She makes the most gut-wrenching call of her professional life to turn around. They retreat from the mountain, leaving the prize untouched and the summit unclimbed. To the outside observer, it looks like a disaster. The grant money has been burned through, the objective remains uncompleted, and the logbooks are empty. However, it is precisely this failure that lays the bedrock for a completely new philosophy that will define her future. The jungles of Myanmar deliver a harsh, brutal tutorial in modesty. Hilaree internalizes a fundamental truth that many ignore. A mountain is ultimately just a pile of rock and ice, whereas a human life is unique and priceless. The physical safety of the crew must always take precedence over record books or fancy titles. While the experience bruises her pride and shatters her ego, it reforges her into a far more resilient and grounded leader. She emerges from the wilderness changed, a different woman than the one who entered. She is now capable of making high-stakes decisions based on her gut instinct, completely tuning out the noise of external expectations. After escaping the suffocating humidity and energy-sapping terrain of Myanmar, Hilaree discovers a fresh reservoir of power, not in isolation but in a bond with another. Jim Morrison enters the frame, a man whose rhythm and drive mirror her own perfectly. To call it a friendship or a romance would be an undersell. It is a synergy of two elite operators, a fusion of world-class professionals who can communicate the subtle language of mortal danger without uttering a single syllable. They are bound together by a singular madness, the desire not just to climb to the top of the world, but to ski down faces that shouldn't be skied. In 2015, this power couple decides to test their chemistry on a Himalayan titan, Mount Everest. Standing as the fifth highest point on Earth, the mountain welcomes them with a casing of bulletproof ice and gale-force winds capable of sweeping a climber into the void. Their objective is borderline insane: to execute a complete ski descent, starting from the very pinnacle. However, the mountain dictates the terms, not them. Above 8,000 meters, the jet stream has stripped away the snow, leaving behind exposed rock and blue ice, as unyielding as concrete. Clicking into skis up there is a suicide pact. Starting a run from the peak guarantees death. Their decades of combined experience whisper that rigidity kills, they have to be flexible to survive. Rather than banging their heads against a wall of impossibility, they pivot to a viable alternative, the Makalu La Couloir. Hilaree steps into her bindings in an atmosphere so oxygen-deprived that simply lifting a leg requires a massive conscious effort. Staring down past her ski tips, she sees thousands of feet of incredibly complex hazards. This isn't a groomed run at a resort or a scene from a glossy energy drink commercial. This is high-consequence ski mountaineering, where a single-edge slip means the end. She navigates the face riding the razor's edge of control at the limit of her physical capacity, etching her name in history as the first woman to ski that line. That descent serves as the crucible for their partnership. Even though they had to abandon the original summit plan, the Makalu expedition proves just how lethal and effective this duo can be. They realize that as a pair, they operate with a speed and fluidity that bloated, heavy expeditions can't match. Their signature philosophy is born fast and light. No armies of porters, no idling in camps, just pure velocity and mobility. They move across the landscape as a single entity relying on a bond of absolute trust. Makalu serves as the training ground, where they refine the style that will soon let them tackle projects deemed pure fantasy. 18 years. That is how long the ghost of Mount Papsura has haunted Hilaree, disturbing her peace and demanding attention. It is a stunning, lethal geometrical pyramid rising in the Indian Himalayas. The locals whisper its name with dread, translating it to the peak of evil. Sinistalswaya, for Hilaree, this is her white whale, her Moby Dick. She first fell in love with its perfect symmetry back in '99, but when she tried to tame it in 2013, the mountain chewed her up and spat her out. That defeat left a deep scar on her professional pride. Now in 2017, armed with the success of Makalu and with Jim Morrison watching her back, she returns to settle the outstanding debt once and for all. She doesn't approach the mountain with starry-eyed wonder this time. She approaches it like a hunter closing in for the kill, ready to pounce. They balance on a needlepoint summit, hovering over 6,000 meters in the air. The face falls away so sharply it induces vertigo, just looking at it, a 3,000-foot vertical plunge into nothingness. We are talking about a 60-degree pitch. To put that in perspective, snow physically struggles to stick to a slope that steep. A fall here isn't a tumble. It's a terminal velocity slide to the grave, with zero chance of self-arrest. This stops being skiing and becomes a managed freefall into the abyss. Hilaree is preparing to execute a maneuver that has never been written in the history books, to ski this face from the absolute apex to the valley floor. The initial section is a nightmare puzzle. The summit is encased in bottle ice, a surface so hard your edges just skate off it. The probability of slipping is 100%. She has no option but to rappel, treating the first 30 meters with the delicate touch of a bomb technician hanging her life on a thin cord and her partner. But the second the ice transitions to snow that can hold an edge, she unclips the safety line. Now, there are no backups. It is just her skill against the mountain's wrath. And right then, the peak of evil lives up to its name. The weather betrays her in a heartbeat. A thick white curtain slams down, swallowing the face and reducing visibility to absolute zero. She is tearing down a near-vertical wall, completely blind to the terrain ahead. All visual references evaporate, leaving her to navigate solely by the pull of gravity and deep-seated muscle memory. She is flying through a white void, trusting a sixth sense, sharpened by decades of alpinism. Hilaree slashes, turns through the mist, threading the needle through one narrow couloir after another. When the angle finally mellows and her skis touch the gentle slope at the base, the adrenaline dumps out of her system. She's done it. The mental loop that had played for nearly 2 decades finally stops. She stood as the first human to carve her signature down the face of the peak of evil, transmuting an old nightmare into her crowning achievement. 2 weeks. That is barely enough time to do laundry, yet it's all that separates her sweat-drenched victory in India from a landing on a frozen Alaskan glacier. Most mortals would book a month at a beach resort to recover from the trauma of the peak of evil. But Hilaree Nelson defies the logic of rest. She takes the kinetic energy from her win and pours it directly into the next engine. Her body is a weaponized athlete, and her blood is so rich with red blood cells from the Himalayas that she doesn't even need to acclimatize. She rolls up to Denali, North America's ceiling, not as a humble pilgrim needing to adjust, but as the landlord coming home. This isn't a siege-style expedition, it's a lightning raid. She ignores the standard tourist path where amateurs drag sleds. She locks onto the Cascade Ridge, a legendary beast of a line requiring masterclass skills in ice rock and snow climbing. Hilaree shoots up the route at a velocity that seems physically impossible to outside observers. She moves with a terrifying efficiency, immune to the exhaustion that plagues ordinary climbers. The summit of Denali at 6,190 meters surrenders without a fight. But as usual, topping out is just the commute to the real job. She clamps into her bindings at the apex. Staring up at her is the Messner couloir, the holy grail of ski mountaineering that most only whisper about. It is a colossal, distinctive gash in the mountain visible from miles away, and the conditions there are hostile, scoured, bullet-hard snow that takes no prisoners. Hilaree drops into the narrow chute with absolute precision, displaying a level of mastery that is almost hypnotic. While most climbers would be gingerly stepping down this terrain terrified and relying heavily on their crampons to keep from falling, she is actively carving turns. This specific moment cements her reputation. She's not just a climber or a skier, she's a hybrid powerhouse. She is just as lethal scaling vertical granite as she is shredding down terrifyingly steep ice faces. Yet the most mind-blowing part of this grueling Alaskan expedition isn't the triumph itself or the records broken. For Hilaree and her partner, Jim Morrison, this frantic speed and bagging 2 major peaks on separate continents in a single month is merely a warm-up. It's a dry run, nothing more than a high-stakes practice session. They are pushing their physiology to the breaking point, stress testing every piece of equipment and their partnership while running on empty. This entire ordeal, this whirlwind of summits and rapid descents, is driven by a singular overarching mission. They are steeling themselves for an objective destined to be their legacy. The Alaskan wilderness is just the sandbox used to hone their lethal edge before the curtain rises on the main event. Imagine a 600-meter vertical coffin of ice plunging straight into nothingness beneath your boots. This is the Lhotse couloir, arguably the most visually stunning and nightmare-inducing line in the high-altitude game. This was the target. This chaotic architecture of frozen water and stone was exactly what Hilaree had been prepping for in Alaska. She is finally standing on the precipice of her magnum opus, the defining achievement of her existence. Her objective is both audaciously simple and terrifyingly complex: to execute the first ever ski descent from the absolute true summit of the 4th tallest mountain on Earth. Adrenaline junkies had attempted it before, but they always strapped in at lower, less lethal elevations, leaving the pinnacle virgin. Hilaree refuses to cut corners. She intends to ride a continuous, unbroken line from the apex to the bottom. To make this happen, she has to roll the dice on a massive strategic gamble. The rest of the climbing world flocks to the Himalayas in spring, capitalizing on predictable weather windows and stable conditions. However, spring turns the Lhotse couloir into a bulletproof nightmare of blue ice and exposed rock. Hilaree opts for the autumn season right after the monsoon, when the peaks are choked with fresh snow. This makes the descent technically skiable, but the trade-off is severe avalanche risks skyrocket, and they have to trail break through waist-deep drifts at altitudes where simply breathing feels like drowning. It's September 30th, 2018. She and Jim Morrison are hovering at 8,516 meters. Up here in the death zone, where the atmosphere is brutally thin, reality starts to warp. Most alpinists snap a selfie and flee for thicker air immediately. Hilaree conversely starts stepping into her bindings on the needlepoint summit, balancing on a fragile cornice barely larger than a kitchen table. A single fumble while latching her boots would result in a freefall spanning kilometers. The sharp click of her binding engaging echoes like a starter's pistol. She initiates the drop. Her edges grip a 50-degree face. The couloir is so tight the rock walls seem to be closing in to crush her. She dives in, navigating the cascades of slough, loose powder avalanches that erupt beneath her skis with every cut. It is a high-stakes ballet performed on a knife edge, requiring superhuman focus. Her quads scream and her lungs starve for oxygen, yet she maintains a hypnotic flow, stringing turns together in flawless cadence. She shreds 7,000 vertical feet, carving all the way down to Camp 2. When she finally skids to a halt on the flat glacier ice, the record books have effectively been burned and rewritten. This run stands as the jewel in her crown, undeniable evidence that for her, impossible is just a suggestion. But Lhotse didn't just wrap up a season. It triggered a seismic evolution in Hilaree's professional life. In an era where success is usually quantified by double taps and viral clips, she secures the kind of gritty respect that carries actual weight and transcends social media trends. National Geographic, the ultimate arbiter of exploration, crowns her their 2018 Adventurer of the Year. Think of it as taking home Best Picture at the Oscars, but for people who risk their lives for a living. This accolade catapults her from a niche hero to a global icon. Suddenly her name rings bells, not just with gear-obsessed climbers, but with the general public and mainstream media. Yet this trophy case brings a heavy burden of responsibility. The industry titan, The North Face, makes a strategic play that many consider revolutionary and bold. For decades, the mantle of global team captain belonged to Conrad Anker, a living deity of alpinism. When Anker chooses to pass the torch, it leaves a massive void. Who on earth has the gravity to replace a monument like him? The choice shocks the traditionalists, but makes perfect sense to anyone tracking Hilaree's trajectory. She ascends to the captaincy. For the first time in the brand's history, a woman is at the helm. This is more than a staffing change. It's a sledgehammer to the glass ceiling. Hilaree steps into the role not just as a figurehead, but as the voice for a new breed of extreme athletes. She doesn't use this status for ego trips. She wields it as a tool for impact. Instead of guarding her trade secrets, she throws the doors open and starts sharing hard-won wisdom. She takes young phenoms like Emily Harrington under her wing, teaching them not just how to place a piton, but how to keep their heads straight when death is staring them in the face. She embodies the concept of mentorship, carving out space for sisterhood in a rugged, testosterone-soaked environment. Simultaneously, she gears up for a different kind of war, one for the survival of her playground. Hilaree realizes the frozen landscapes that defined her existence are vanishing at terrifying speed. She aligns herself with the advocacy powerhouse Protect Our Winters to fight back. The athlete evolves into an agitator, leveraging her fame to scream about the climate crisis. She's testifying on Capitol Hill, pushing for legislation and rallying the outdoor community. Hilaree Nelson is no longer just the woman who skis scary lines. She has become a multidimensional force, a matriarch of the mountains who balances leading a global team and nurturing the next crop of gold medalists. She is fighting for the earth itself, all while operating at the absolute zenith of her physical and social power. But then, listen, that sound isn't the wind howling. It's the relentless, maddening drumming of rain on a nylon tent fly. September 2022 greets climbers in Nepal not with crisp autumn air, but with a suffocating wet humidity. The monsoon season, which should have long since tapped out, has dug its claws into the Himalayas and refuses to let go. Manaslu, the 8th highest peak on the planet, is transforming into a loaded weapon. While it pours at base camp up in the death zone, that moisture manifests as meters of heavy wet snow. The mountain is literally bloating, stacking tons of unstable volatile mass onto slopes that are already steep enough to kill. The tension in camp is palpable, crackling like static electricity. Veteran Sherpas and guides glare at the overcast sky, fully aware that every hour of precipitation pushes the avalanche needle deeper into the catastrophic zone. Hilaree isn't here as a wealthy tourist ticking a box. She is the captain of the best mountaineering team on Earth, a virtuoso who interprets snowpack nuances better than most people read a headline. Flanking her is Jim Morrison, her partner in life and climbing. They function as a single biological unit. They've survived the meat grinder of Lhotse and unlocked the riddles of Denali together. Their resume gives them X-ray vision for hazards. They know exactly where a slab will stick and where it's primed to shatter. But even their encyclopedic knowledge is facing off against the pure random chaos of a weather system gone wrong. This season, Manaslu is acting like a feral animal. Forecasts are worthless, shifting violently every few hours, dangling brief windows of opportunity that slam shut before you can even lace your boots. The radio chatters with panic. The deep, guttural roar of avalanches echoes through the valley. Somewhere above, Camp 3 massive plates of snow are already tearing loose, obliterating equipment caches. To any rational observer, these are neon signs screaming, "Turn back." But high-altitude alpinism operates on a twisted, paradoxical logic that defies common sense. If you wait for a flawless day, you'll rot in your tent. Hilaree and Jim make the hard call. They will play the hand they've been dealt. They are betting everything on their fast and light philosophy. They are convinced they can thread the needle dancing between the storms and using their supreme skiing ability to escape quickly. It's a calculated risk, but a terrifying one. The atmosphere at high camp is heavy, practically vibrating with tension. While other expedition teams are surrendering to the conditions, packing their gear or hunkering down in tents to wait out the weather, Nelson and Morrison make a different choice. They refuse to sit still. They step out onto the climbing route, fully cognizant that they are stepping into a high-stakes gamble where the odds of survival are constantly fluctuating. Beneath their boots lies a deceptive carpet of fresh, unsettled snow, a pristine, white layer that crunches satisfyingly but conceals a deadly sheet of hard ice just millimeters below. It is a beautiful trap. With every upward stride, they are forced to weigh the stability of the slope against their desire to summit, balancing risk on a razor-thin internal scale. They press forward, piercing through a dense shroud of cloud cover, ascending steadily into the death zone. Here the air becomes dangerously thin, starving the brain and muscles of fuel, while the unforgiving physics of the steep slope strip away any margin for error. In this domain, a single misstep is not just a mistake, it is a sentence. It is September 26th. Picture yourself balancing on a serrated knife edge elevated to the cruising altitude of a commercial airliner. The atmosphere is so tenuous that every breath becomes a desperate struggle, a conscious effort to snatch scarce oxygen molecules from the void as if they were priceless diamonds. In the critical window between 10:40 and 11:30 in the morning, Hilaree Nelson and Jim Morrison approach the culmination of their journey. Unlike the majority of commercial expeditions that halt at the Safer 4 summit to snap a photo and turn back, these two are driven by a purer, more dangerous ambition. Their drive propels them across the perilous ridge to the true summit of Manaslu. It is a precarious, terrifyingly small patch of snow sitting at a staggering 8,163 meters above sea level, a place where the earth literally ends. Standing there, they experience a fleeting moment of pure, unadulterated triumph. The rest of the world is buried beneath a sea of clouds far below, leaving the two of them to share this dizzying, isolated peak in total solitude. It feels as though the battle is won, and the most grueling physical exertion is behind them. Now remains the task they traveled across the globe to accomplish, the ski descent. But high-altitude peaks are indifferent to human narratives and rarely offer fairy tale endings. Hilaree begins the routine she has performed thousands of times before, transitioning from climber to skier, clicking into her bindings on the roof of the world. She is perched on a crest so narrow it resembles a gymnast's balance beam, with infinite drops on either side. She makes her first move, her skis slicing into the snow. In that split second, a phenomenon known to mountaineers as a slough occurs, a shift that sounds innocuous but signals disaster. It is not a catastrophic avalanche in the traditional sense, merely a superficial layer of loose powder sliding over the hardpack. On a wide-open ski run, it would be nothing more than a nuisance. But here on a knife-edge ridge with absolutely zero room for correction, this minor cascade of snow transforms into a death sentence. Her ski loses its bite on the icy subsurface. The snow beneath her boots disintegrates, and in a heartbeat, the laws of physics assert their dominance. Gravity seizes her, and Hilaree's balance is irrevocably broken. Time seems to warp, stretching a single second into an agonizing eternity. Instead of falling toward the uphill slope, where she might have frantically driven her ice axe into the snow to self-arrest, the cruel force of inertia flings her in the opposite direction out into the void. She is swept helplessly off the south face of the mountain. This is the wild, untamed shadow side of Manaslu, a terrified vertical drop into a sheer abyss where no routes have been mapped and no safety lines have ever been fixed. Jim Morrison stands only a few meters away, watching the nightmare unfold in real time. The brutal reality of 8,000-meter peaks is that they render you powerless. There is absolutely nothing he can do to intervene. The short distance of an outstretched arm suddenly becomes an infinite, unbridgeable chasm. Paralyzed on the summit, he is forced to act as a helpless witness to the catastrophe, watching in horror as the figure of his partner and love vanishes into the blinding white emptiness. The fall is not quick. It is agonizingly, heartbreakingly prolonged. Hilaree falls approximately 5,000 to 6,000 feet, dropping more than a vertical mile past jagged ice walls and unforgiving rock ledges. When the motion finally stops, the silence that swallows the mountain is heavier and more deafening than the loudest scream imaginable. The woman who just moments ago stood on the very ceiling of the world has been swallowed by the heart of the mountain. All that remains is a solitary, truncated ski track on the peak, and a partner whose entire universe has shattered in the blink of an eye. The radio remains static-filled and silent, a lack of noise that is far more terrifying than any frantic plea for help. From the instant she fell, all communication with Hilaree was severed, plunging the mountain into a suffocating information vacuum. Far below, in the connected world of high-speed internet and instant breaking news, chaos reigns. The initial headlines beaming across the globe are riddled with inaccuracies and false optimism. Reporters rush to claim that she has merely fallen into a crevasse. This specific detail travels like a distorted game of telephone, fundamentally altering how the tragedy is perceived. A crevasse suggests entrapment, which implies a possibility of survival, a target for a rescue mission, and the desperate hope for a miracle. The entire mountaineering community holds its collective breath, eagerly awaiting updates on her recovery. However, the grim reality on the high slopes is far more brutal than any news ticker can convey. The climbers who were there understand the truth. This was not a stumble into a hole, it was a catastrophic fall down a rock and ice face 1.5 kilometers high. An immediate search is physically impossible. To make matters worse, nature drops a heavy curtain over the scene, effectively hiding the tragedy from the world. The relentless monsoon season, which had been plaguing the expedition for weeks, delivers its final cruel blow. The sky seals shut behind a thick, impenetrable blanket of gray clouds, and heavy snow begins to hammer the mountain, grounding all rescue helicopters indefinitely. An excruciating period of waiting begins. 2 full days crawl by in a haze of complete uncertainty. Grounded pilots pace nervously, chain-smoking and staring up at the low cloud ceiling, fully aware that time is their enemy. Every minute of delay allows the mountain to scrub the slopes clean, erasing ski tracks and burying any sign of the legendary athlete under layers of fresh, heavy snow. It is the specific torture of forced inaction when the rescue gear is prepped. The team is adrenaline ready, but the elemental forces simply say no. It is not until September 28th that the sky finally relents, opening a brief, fragile window for flight. A high-performance Simric air helicopter roars off the landing pad, banking toward the formidable south face of Manaslu. Inside the cabin, the silence is oppressive. Jim Morrison sits strapped in, preparing to do something you would not wish upon your bitterest foe. He must fly over a terrifying abyss to scour the ice for the broken body of his partner, the person he loves most. Flanking him in this grim task are the elite pilot Captain Surendra Paudel and the legendary mountaineer Mingma Tenzi Sherpa. The crew's eyes frantically scan the endless, blinding white canvas, straining to distinguish a tiny anomaly against the gigantic scale of the slope. The helicopter labors upward along the presumed line of the fall, surveying forbidding zones where no human being has ever set foot before. Suddenly, at an altitude of approximately 6,700 meters, amidst a chaotic jumble of ice blocks and jagged rock, a vivid splash of color arrests their attention. It is too bright to be a rock, too distinct to be a shadow. Jim instantly recognizes the gear. The helicopter fights the thin air to hover in place. There is no longer any doubt. They have located Hilaree far below the summit, resting on a cone of avalanche debris where her final tragic descent came to a halt. The lingering, desperate hope of a miraculous rescue from a crevasse is finally dashed against the harsh, unforgiving geometry of the south face. The thumping of the helicopter's rotor blades, slicing through the thick air, signals the definitive end of the rescue operation. Hilaree Nelson's remains are carefully lifted from the slope, wrenched from the icy, possessive grip of Manaslu, and transported back toward the civilization of the city. The transition is jarringly instantaneous, from the wild, deadly silence of the high Himalayas to the chaotic noise and dust of the capital. The moment the helicopter skids make contact with the tarmac, the last ghostly wisp of hope that this was all a mistake evaporates. The official confirmation of her death is released, dry, bureaucratic, and devastating. It hits the community like a physical blow. The news tears across the planet faster than the wind on a summit ridge, freezing climbers in shock. From the streets of Chamonix to the slopes of Colorado, and from the corporate offices of the North Face to the remote base camps of the Himalayas. Even people who are calloused and accustomed to losing friends to the mountains refuse to believe that these peaks have taken her. She was the one who always seemed eternal, truly invincible. On September 30th, vibrant technical gear is swapped for somber mourning attire. The scene shifts to the sacred grounds of the ancient Swayambhunath monastery, famously known to travelers as the Monkey Temple. Perched on a hill overlooking the sprawling Kathmandu Valley, the air is heavy with the pungent smoke of burning juniper and incense. The farewell ceremony strictly follows Buddhist traditions, honoring the very culture that Hilaree deeply respected and considered to be her second home. Gathered in a tight circle around the funeral pyre are those who knew her soul best. Jim Morrison stands alongside climbing partners, lifelong friends, and Sherpas, a collective of people who understood the immense value of her warm smile at 8,000 meters. As the fire begins to consume the physical body, symbolically freeing her spirit for its next journey, the low, monotonous chanting of the monks rises to drown out the sound of stifled sobs. An entire era seems to dissolve into the smoke rising from that funeral pyre. Hilaree Nelson departs not merely as a victim of a tragic accident, but as a titan of the sport who fundamentally rewrote the rules of the game. She leaves behind a colossal legacy that cannot be measured simply in meters of vertical gain. With 40 of the most grueling expeditions across 16 countries under her belt, she laid down bold ski tracks in places where the bravest alpinists were afraid to even walk. She proved unequivocally that a woman could be far more than just a participant. She was a leader forging pathways into the unknown. Her life was one continuous, relentless ascent, a perpetual search for that perfect, elusive line on the map. The story of her life comes full circle, having begun with the wet, heavy snow of the Cascade Mountains and concluded on the summit of one of the planet's highest giants. The mountains gave her everything she ever possessed. They gave her fame, they gave her deep love, and they gave her a profound sense of purpose. And in the end, they claimed her for themselves. Now her ashes mingle with the wind, blowing eternally toward the Himalayas she loved so dearly. For a legend like Hilaree Nelson, the concept of death holds no traditional dominion. Instead, her journey has evolved into a perpetual ascent that resonates in the minds of every adventurer brave enough to trace her path. She remains eternally present in the only sanctuary where her soul truly felt at home, forever merged with the unforgiving, timeless ice and the vast, boundless expanse of the high-altitude sky.